Hello, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Welsh. I am the managing editor of The Scene, as well as the stage manager here at the Dialogues program. Thank you for joining us for the 2019 edition of EXPO Chicago, the International Exhibition of Contemporary and Modern Art. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artist discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on the current issues that engage them. A special thank you to our partners, the Terra Foundation of American Art and Surface Magazine. The cosmos controls and regulates our understanding of space and structures, yet it is also an architecture. Thinking in terms of how we can define a cosmos, both universally and subjectively, this panel, moderated by the artistic director of EXPO Chicago and editor-in-chief of The Scene, Stephanie Cristello, will explore the practices of Eduardo Terrazas, whose work includes the iconic pavilions designed for the Olympic Games in Mexico City in 1968, and Chicago-based artist Edra Soto, whose installations explore how patterns arise from aesthetic structures of colonialism within her native Puerto Rico. Please join me in extending a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. As she mentioned, my name is Stephanie Cristello, and I'm the artistic director of EXPO Chicago. And before we started the panel, I just wanted to note that unfortunately, Hans Ulrich Obrist, who was the original moderator of this discussion from the Serpentine Galleries as the artistic director there, unfortunately cannot be with us today due to a family bereavement. But I just wanted to acknowledge all of his work in helping to shape the conversation and collaborating with me on this concept to bring these two artists together. Without him, the idea would not have been born in the first place. But I'm very excited to have both Eduardo Terrazas and Edra Soto here with us today. In regards to how I met these two artists and what we'll be speaking about, I had the pleasure of doing a studio visit with Eduardo Terrazas in Mexico City earlier this year, but I've been a long time follower of his work and just wanted to thank you for everything that you've done for the architecture and design fields as well as the contemporary art fields in your practice. It's really a huge legacy and an honor to have you here. And for Edra Soto, who really represents a younger generation of this work, thank you also. And Edra and I have been friends and sort of satellite collaborators for the past few years. And I'm so impressed with what you've done in your practice and how it's grown, and being able to watch that over the past 10 years that we've known each other in Chicago. It's really special, I think, to gather you both here to talk about this literally universal topic about the cosmos. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to Edra, who will just give a brief presentation on her work. And before we start, just, also that what we're really speaking about today are the geometric practices and the formal qualities that you both share, but also how they extend into other elements of culture, politics, socioeconomic implications, and all of the wisdom that we can learn from a cosmic logic. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Edra, who will then be followed by a presentation with Eduardo, and then we'll moderate a discussion on the overlaps and differences in both of your practices.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's a pleasure and an honor to be presenting with you as well. So the work that you can appreciate here of me, this is from a series called Graft. And Graft originated in Puerto Rico. I lived and grew up in Puerto Rico. I lived there for 27 years. And I live with in a middle-class home. This house where I lived had really a main entrance that had a pattern that is very similar to something like this, but it's in concrete. And living in Puerto Rico, doing my elementary and high school, I start reflecting about the things that we learn in that elementary primary education, and I start thinking about why Puerto Ricans know everything about colonial architecture, but there's not great knowledge of the architecture that we live in. And I start thinking about these patterns and the origins of these patterns, where they come from, what, who are the authors of these patterns. And that initiated what I call Graft. So this picture illustrates a component of Graft that allowed me to create a literary component for Graft. It's a representation of a bus stop from Puerto Rico that allowed me to create a seating area for people, for audiences and visitors to sit down and have a moment to reflect on the work that they're looking at. And I've been doing Graft since 2012, and the first inception of Graft was in 2013 at an artist-run space called Terra in Oak Park, and that was probably the most ideal space to create this architectural intervention, because it's also someone's house, but it's an American house. And thinking about the particular structure of that house in relation to the house in Puerto Rico, it felt almost like idyllic to do this. I think about Graft as an imaginary transplant that comes from Puerto Rico to the US. And when you grow up in Puerto Rico the way that I did, living 27 years there, before living in the US, and thinking of myself all the time as an American citizen, I also, after living 20 years in Puerto Rico, this project become more and more relevant, because I can see how different I am from an American. And also I can see all the things that are, all the influences, all the American influences that made me who I am. So being Puerto Rican is just a very complex and kind of interesting and very exciting thing to explore. So in this kind of platform, in the art platform, it gives me a lot to think about, to reflect, to explore, and to research.
And Edra, can you speak about these hidden photographs that are within the artworks?
Yeah, so I think Graft as an architectural intervention became basically a pattern that I resourced from Puerto Rico, and I made a representation of it and fix it into architectural spaces in Chicago or any other place in the U.S. I did a lot of these patterns in Chicago. This one that you see here is at the Paul Museum, and the original source is from a house in the neighborhood that I grew up in Puerto Rico. The images that you can see from the through the patterns doesn't exist in all the Graft iterations. I think the first iteration I did using inserting images of research of vernacular architecture from Puerto Rico I started doing that. The first time I tried this was actually in an art fair, at Untitled Art Fair with Luis de Jesus Gallery. He was so generous, gave me the facade of his booth, and I made architectural intervention for that booth that you can see both sides. And in the back side, you can see actually a kind of gadget that was a viewfinder. And in the front, I think I wanted to leave it exposed because art fairs, as you can experience, there's so much happening that sometimes it's hard to perceive what is going on. And I just left everything exposed for people to sort of capture that there's something that you can experience in the front of the pattern. So here you can see how people are, you're gazing. And this is an experience that it actually made me very happy, how people interact with, because it become more interactive than I ever planned and imagined. And it's voluntary. You don't have to really get close to the fence to experience it. You can see it, or
But
if
there's-
you want to engage.
Yeah, there's something always additional
further.
in your work, and I think that that's something that both you and Eduardo share, is that there is this frontal geometry that is very apparent, and it's always a central geometry, very symmetrical and harmonious in some ways, that go beyond a graphic. And so I wanted to just switch over to Eduardo's slides and have you speak a little bit about your work as well.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be talking about work I have done since 1974. It's called Possibilities of a Structure, the Concept. The concept is with one structure, you can go on working with the essential basic elements of the structure, and you can continue playing with the structure. And I now have 350 images, works of art done without the same geometry. And the geometry that you're seeing is not so fast.
Strobe effect.
The geometry that you see, some of them are my works of art, some of them are geometry from the cosmos. That's why I call it possibility of a structure from the serious cosmos. The cosmos is a square for me, a square that has 4 infinite. The right angles are infinite, and the diagonals are the infinite lines of the cosmos. And then the perpendicular lines, the crossing, is to set up yourself and the cosmos. And then it has the four forces that make the cosmos, the universe, harmonious. Gravity, which makes all the planets and the stars and float and go around without crashing into each other. Just think of what the gravity force. Think of the wisdom it has in itself. I'm now very much involved with the wisdom of the cosmos, because we have forgotten the wisdom of the cosmos. That's what's happening with global warming. We have forgotten that it can be global warming, which is related to the wisdom of the cosmos. And we have to go back and recover that wisdom and understand it and live with it. This is the sun is there, and the moon is there. And look at It's like a work of art, but it's not a work of art. It's a reality. The sun, it's an eclipse of the sun. And this eclipse of the sun, I try to do a work of art, trying to imitate that, not imitate, but trying to acknowledge the force, the expression that it has, and how we can capture it as human beings.
Next.
That's not mine. This is mine. You see the same structure, always repeating itself in different forms and different ways. This, next one. Next
Next.
one. This is the eye of a fly. You can see there's a certain similarity, a certain of the eye of the fly and one of my works of art. And this is part of the eye of the fly. No, it's my work of art, my drawing. This is a city. You can see still the working of the human beings related to the wisdom of the cosmos. How we can follow that thing, and we have to, this is the cosmos in the universe. This is the plan of Mexico Tenochtitlan, the city of Mexico when the Aztecs were, and the Spaniards came, that was how it looked. Next one. Which is very similar to this. And this is still part of the same structure I'm working with. Next one. They're made with yarn, some of them are made with yarn glued to a piece of wood by a bee wax. And they're glue, and that's why you have a substructure on them. And
Eduardo, I
different
wanted to
nuances.
pause. Yeah, I wanted to pause on this too. So, where did you get the inspiration to do these wooden panels covered with beeswax with the yarn? I know that there's a specific craft that you're referencing.
Well, there's a native Indian called huicholes in the northwest of Mexico City in the mountains. They live and they use that technique. And I thought it was a very interesting technique. And I've been working with them since now. I just received a phone call from the mountains of Jalisco to here to the fair in Chicago by the man who I began working with them. It was incredible.
And how long have you been working with this huichol
Well, since
technique?
1970,
Yeah.
69.
Yeah. So this is part of also your exploration of the cosmos and an infinity in making the work, no?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the craft is very necessary for the meditation you do with the craft is fantastic because you're meditating while you're doing the craft. And we have forgotten how to meditate about the world, about ourselves, about our friends, and about our loves, and so on. And the craft is very necessary, and we have lost the use of the hands as craft and how to connect the hands with the brain. These are the wisdom of the colors of the cosmos and the colors of my work.
And color plays a very important role in both of your practices too. So I'm wondering if you can speak a bit about your use of color and where it comes from. I know that this also perhaps has to do with some of the indigenous tribes in Mexico and how they make their work.
Well, the color is used in Mexico in a lot of all throughout Mexico, the pre-Hispanic cultures had a lot of colors, and you use the color in your houses, in your textiles, in your pottery, and I always think color, you have to play with color. You don't have to be so rational with color. You can play with it, and this is part of the play with color.
I'll do it a little bit closer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And Edra, for you, is color, does it have some sort of symbolic significance?
Yeah, most of the colors that I use are not that many. I haven't used a lot of color in my work, but the ones that I have used are based in the common house of Puerto Rico, and they're very specific. I made a comparison between colonial architecture and the common architecture, and there's a clear difference, and I mean in my reflection, because I really haven't been able to find great information about why people paint the colors of the houses in Puerto Rico certain colors. It's a little bit of a random one, but there's a particular Caribbean palette that is inspired by the ocean and by the sea, by seashells, and that every time I think about the different pastels and the greens and the peach colors, they feel like they're a part of that vernacular, the Caribbean, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting that the both of you, your work has such universal appeal, but it's also very rooted in the formalities of a certain geography, of a certain space.
Well, I think color and forms have to do with a lot with what I'm saying, the eye of the fly, or the this or that, or the eclipse of the sun. You can see the world in the texture of this rock, you can see the cosmos.
How is it like to live in the world when every single small thing
Well,
always
you have
reminds you of
to
something bigger?
relate it to
It's so
that.
special.
But that's part of what I'm trying to recover. The idea that I have a series called The Museum of Everyday Life, in which I buy things from the markets and put them together, and they become a work of art. It depends how you see them. For instance, rulers that are made with centimeters. The centimeters become something that, if you don't know that they're numbers, they're markers that you would do with your drawing with ink. So you have to look at the world in a bigger extension, but at the same time, it's very harmonious, the cosmos, the universe, and we have to live with that. You cannot go beyond the limits of the universe.
Yes. I had a question also.
This is
Oh, yeah. I'll let you continue, actually, because this is fun. When you annotate these, what was this?
that's the face of an animal, a fish.
Okay. It's very good.
This is water,
A wave
the wave.
for like a surfer.
And then next one. Next one. A starry night.
Yeah.
Next one.
all white thread.
all white, and you see the stars.
Yeah.
This is all ice, and all white was the before one.
Right.
Next one.
Next one.
This is the same color as the green and the
Yeah.
whole of the water.
And so you've really made an alphabet, like an entire language out of these images that come from nature. And I had a question about this, which is that, well, first a statement, how all elements of natural order are fictitious. So an alphabet is a code that we all learn, but it doesn't, quite this is how we communicate now, but alphabet, mathematics, formulas, structures, these are all things that humans impose onto chaos, because the cosmos and the world are just chaotic systems. How do
No, the
you...
cosmos of the world doesn't have a chaotic system. It has a very harmonious system.
Okay.
And that's the one we're destroying.
This is interesting. Okay, so your belief, your viewpoint is that there is natural order and that humans bring chaos to that natural order?
If we are not establishing our limits to our development.
Okay,
That's exactly the point.
yeah. So do you see this work being in some way, even though it's very formal, activist? Is it an activist project? Like, do you see these works as being political in some way?
Well, I see it, art is doing its own way of presenting, a way of presenting the art, which is universal, I think. This you can present to anybody about the climate change, and the climate change is part of the warming, and it's a universal. This kind of language, I pretend that it's universal,
Yeah.
not locally.
I heard something really beautiful last night from another artist that said, art is not something that you can understand, it's something that you can experience. Is that similar?
Well, you can experience it and then do your own reflection on it.
Yeah. And Edra, do you feel like this, that your work proposes a type of order onto the world, or is it a little more subjective than that? Because you also work with so much vernacular in your work that it seems like the graft is just, one proposal that seems very ordered, and as soon as you get closer, it becomes something else. Can you speak a bit to that?
Yeah. Yeah, it departs from a structure that is actually more challenging than what it looks like at first sight. And that's very interesting for me, to something to work with, and every time I assess it, I realize how challenging these patterns are, even though they look so simple. And most of them hold by a grid, so the grid become very important in this conversation as well. But I think I'm more interested in humanizing the architecture. So that's why I call it Graft, because I start thinking about architecture and in terms of as an artist, I start thinking about architecture as an artist, not being an architect, and dealing with conflicts and issues and problems to solve that an architect might have to confront. I think I just gave myself the freedom to decide, okay, I am dealing with this vernacular language, but it's a very personal, it's going to end up being a very personal conversation about life condition and where you live, and positioning yourself
In a lived environment.
and creating a place for yourself.
Yeah. And Eduardo, you began as an architect and then
Well, I was going to say human beings have to establish languages in order to exist in this world. We have to establish a language to communicate ourselves and to communicate to the world, which is the environment. We have to establish numbers, or we establish the languages. They have been millions of languages since men existed that have been established and forgotten. Chicago, for instance, is the great city in the world. There's not a city more great thought than Chicago. All the buildings, Mies van der Rohe was the head of the thing that made the skyline of Chicago, and it's a great thing. His first build.
Do I hear an applause in the audience for Mies van der Rohe on a grid? Yes.
No, but
Okay.
people have to realize that how the architecture of Mies, of his way of thinking, influenced the way Chicago is all about. Even the Lakeshore Drive building, which is a round building, is made with perfect geometry. Geometry is the language that man has invented to build an environment for him to live within the environment. And geometry is the one that.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship to Chicago? Because I think it's really important that we are having this conversation here within this city. When did you start working here? Or how has Chicago influenced your practice?
Well, I was very much influenced by, again, Mies van der Rohe, which was influenced by the Bauhaus school in Germany. The Bauhaus school in Germany started 100 years ago, exactly 1919. And it was a school that wanted to see art in every field. It's a multidisciplinary way of looking at art. They had graphic art, they have the textile. There's a big exhibition of Annie Albers at the Art Institute, which was part of the Bauhaus. They had scenography, they had sculpture, they had Kandinsky, all those people that were the formation of the Bauhaus. Mies van der Rohe was the last director of the Bauhaus in 1933. Then he came to United States, to the University of Chicago in 1950, I think, around 1950. And he was the director of the School of Architecture for many years, and it influenced all New York, Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill, all the great architects was influenced by that way of dealing with the grid and the precision of the construction that you need to do the skyscrapers. And the skyscrapers have to do with gravity, and they have to do with the earth, what's on the soil, because if not, they cannot build. I won't worry you.
So modernism is thanks to gravity.
Eh?
Modernism could be thanks to gravity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to say with my work is that it's related to many things. It's not only, I call myself painter, but it's not a painting, it's even craft. But I see all the paintings there, all the sculptures there. It's a multidisciplinary way of looking at the world that we need in order, if we just see it as an economic and which is one way of looking at Chicago, is from the economic point of view. It's everything is economics. But at the same time, if we leave everything to economics, what about human beings? Where do we stand from? We need more dimension of humanity to build our environments.
Yeah. No, I agree. And so, Edra, could you speak a little bit about your relationship to Chicago also in the development of this work over the past decade? And, specifically, the titles of the works are Graft, which is an allusion to the colonial forces that literally grafted European and Western influences onto Puerto Rico's architecture and patterns. But then you've also taken this next step of a grafting by taking them from Puerto Rico and bringing them to not only Chicago, but various cities throughout the United States and the world as part of your work. So how do you relate to, first question is, how does Chicago relate to this body of work? How has it helped it to develop? And two, how do you see your continuation of Graft commenting on this colonial history?
Well, after living 20 years in Chicago, I think I start thinking about Graft and the different iterations that I have gone through. Chicago became an opportunity, actually, for me to explore Graft, because I needed to explore Graft in territories outside of Puerto Rico. So my relationship with Chicago and the different institutions and places in Chicago allow me to not only make all these different iterations, be creative about how to assess the different spaces that I was given to or invited to. Yeah.
Essentially, it provided you the platform to graft.
Yeah, I mean, it became like a blank canvas.
Yeah.
Every space that I actually felt more and more comfortable reacting to.
Right.
So Chicago became the most interactive because I live here,
Yeah.
and is when it manifests the most. It's the place that it have manifested the most.
Yeah, I find it so important in both of your work that there has to be this grounding that you react to. And Eduardo, for you, it was making this system of the grid that can be a part for like infinite patterns. It's almost like a chessboard, like there's an infinite number of, it's something, I don't know, like there's more possible positions on a chessboard than there are molecules in the universe or something like this. But it really is this, by giving yourself parameters and a tight system, you've been able to go much further in making new images from limits. And I find that so interesting that the limits to both of your work have sort of led to some illusion of an infinity.
Yeah, development, yeah, I agree. I mean, the last couple of years, integrating the viewfinders to Graft allow me to expand the narrative of the project, and then I felt like it became more more open. It have more things to connect with. Yeah.
And I wanted to do something of a sort of case study. So I'm wondering if at the back of the stage, you all could pull up the diagram of the cosmos that Eduardo created, so that we can I wanted to hear from your words exactly how you came up with this with this specific grid, and where you came up with what defined X and Y and things like this. Sorry, and I know that you're, yeah. Would you like my, just hold it close.
The cosmos is a square. This is a subjective way of looking at the cosmos. When I began doing this thing, I never imagined that I would continue explaining this thing after 50 years. It has 4 infinite points of infinite, the 4 corners. And these are the lines of the infinite, the diagonals. Then we have to have a way of orienting ourselves within the cosmos, so you establish the x-axis and the y-axis. And then you have the celestial dome, which is the tangent to the square, which surrounds us all over the world, all of our time, of our lives, on top and on the bottom. It's on the bottom, the celestial dome, but we don't see it. It's underneath here. Way down there, but it exists the celestial dome. And then there's the 4 forces that make the cosmos harmonious. The gravity, which makes all the planets roll and roll and roll and never crash to each other. Because the gravity is a force that regulates that distance and the moving of it. Then the electromagnetism, which is the energy that is around us all the time. Here's energy. Our air is part of the energy. Then there's the the force, the natural force, the strong nuclear force, which holds the atoms together. All our matters are bound with atoms put together by a force, which is called the atomic force. And then there's the atomic force weak, which is when it explodes is the atom bomb. It explodes because it blows all the atoms of the nature, of the matter. And then at the end, we have again the planet Earth in the center of the world, of the cosmos. And with that structure, all the ones you saw.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Am I going to hold? All right. We can keep going. I could walk all the way over.
Done with the same structure.
So what Eduardo just said is there's 365 of these?
350.
350, all with the same structure. Wait, we'll hold it up again. Are we going to fold it?
You play a lot.
We'll have this for everyone to view after the panel as well. And so, Eduardo, while we're folding, because I'm going to multitask, you have beauty, art, mathematics, philosophy, and poetry. Why?
That's a multidisciplinary way of looking at life. If you, the most important one is beauty, is love and beauty, which is the same thing. Love and beauty. But then human beings understood that there's a thing called philosophy, there's a thing called mathematics, there's a thing called art, and there's a thing called whatever you want to see it from different economics, politics, etc.
It's your Weechel friend calling again.
No, it's not.
you. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to open up for questions. I'm sure that there will be some lively ones in the audience. Anyone first? We have a microphone going around as well. Yeah.
This question is for Eduardo. So the slide presentation was so beautiful because we have pictures of nature and then art that you created. Do you create your art and those extraordinary color combinations, are they all based on something you've seen in nature?
No, they were chosen 20 years afterwards.
So the color combinations, you're creating them yourself?
Myself, yes.
Wow, they're gorgeous.
And it's because we have forgotten that color exists, and nuances of color exists all over ourselves all the time, and we have kind of forgotten the nuances of the colors and the way they speak to us.
I have one more quick question. Are you painting on top of the yarn work then? That's what it seems to be.
No.
Or is the yarn colored?
The yarn is already colored.
There are actually two beautiful works of Eduardo's in Timothy Taylor's booth here that you can see. So they're all wooden panels that are covered with beeswax, and the thread is just embedded into the wax. So they have this feeling of being embroidered without any stitch marks. It's really a special thing.
Go and see them, because the yarn
Closer.
goes, you press it to the wood this way, and then you press it this other way, and then you press it this other way. And when the yarn goes this direction, the light hits it in a special way, and the light hits it in a different direction. And it's the same green, but the green is here in one tone, and here is in another tone.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Yeah.
Eduardo, you've taken a concept of infinity that most, I think, folks don't understand that how something can be infinite, yet you've put it in a box. When did that happen, and why? Where did you see that? How do you explain something that's infinite? And I don't think most people understand that sideways 8. And you put it in a box. I would never be able to do that. I don't know how you saw that or where that came to you.
Eduardo, please, the microphone.
Well, the idea of infinite is beyond all ourselves. It's something that we don't grasp yet what the infinite is all about. But there's a concept called infinite. So instead of trying to reach to it way beyond I don't know where, I brought it to myself and said, this is infinite. This is the cosmos. It's a square. The cosmos is, maybe there are other cosmoses, or maybe there are not. We don't know exactly. But that's what we have to understand, that we're a little bit. The earth is the only place where we know that life like ourselves, that have a rational way of looking at things, exists in the whole universe. And life exists 10 kilometers above us, Mount Everest, and 10 kilometers beyond us in the depths of the sea. And that's where life ends, in the cortex of the orange peel of the earth, that's where life exists. And that's it in the whole universe. So we have to be very careful of what to do with that life.
And can I just say also, because your question's really interesting in terms of, keeping infinity in a box. I think that, often our idea of infinity is that everything is infinitely multiplied. But in mathematics and in many scientific theories, infinity is infinite division. And so in that sense, having infinity in a box that can always just change a pattern is maybe the most true infinite gesture that you've done in your work.
Well, thank you for putting the infinite in a box. I already thought I put it on a square, but you say in a box, that's even better, my friend.
Thank you all so much again. Thank you to our panelists.